we still have your attention. And I'm now going to take up the next session with two leading experts in the OTT and MarTech domain. Let me introduce the panelists I have today. I have with me Tarun Katial, whom I'm sure a lot of you in the Indian media advertising ecosystem know. He's a media veteran of over 2 decades. Tarun Katial is the CEO of ZEE5. In his current role, Tarun is responsible, as you know, for steering ZEE5, India's largest and most comprehensive digital entertainment platform for language content towards gaining industry leadership position. As you also know, Tarun has a varied and diverse background across India's leading media companies. He was last at Big FM, where he was the founder, CEO, and CEO during his duration. He also set up Think Big, the content incubator, and the big TV channels Magic and Ganga. Tarun began his career with advertising agencies, but now, as you see, he's a content advertising tech expert. He also worked with the Star Network, where he rose to head the content and communications across the network in India. He also was instrumental in the record of accomplishment through successful shows like KBC. Apart from that, he was famous for launching Indian Fear Factors and a lot of other shows in India. Welcome, Tarun, on board. Glad you're here doing this with us. And as I mentioned, Tarun is now part of ZEE5, which is India's leading OTT network. I was just going through some of the stuff ZEE5 has been doing, and from what I understand, in the last 3-4 months, their consumption has shot up by almost 80% during the lockdown period. They made aggressive investments in ZEE5 ads, ad tech. They also have a partnership with Airtel and Jio Fiber. And they are also launching very soon Hyper Shorts, which is India's first ever fully homegrown short video platform. So all the best to you on that, Tarun. In addition to Tarun, what we also thought was to invite a leading MarTech expert from Europe. Maciej Zawadzinski is with us. Hi, Maciej.
Everyone.
Good to see you. Maciej is an expert
Thanks for having me.
And advertising technology and a founder of several successful companies. Maciej is also currently devoting his knowledge and skills to developing Piwik PRO, a privacy-focused analytics platform and the perfect alternate, as they say, to Google Analytics. He's also in the past led ClearCode to its position as a world-leading software house specializing in customer advertising and marketing technology. Thank you for joining us, Maciej, all the way from Poland. So thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this session. We have people tuned in already. And as has been announced already, the topic of what we are discussing today is around the collapsing web banner and third-party data while shifting ad budgets to OTT. Before I get into the detailed thought points about what's going to happen, let me ask you a very elementary question. We've seen over the last many years, Google, Facebook have had a kind of duopoly when it comes to customer attention as well as advertising money. Why don't you tell both of you tell our viewers, what are the 3 big reasons? Why do you think over the next 12-18 months, this money, the advertising money, as well as consumer attention is likely to shift from that duopoly to also the third pillar, which is gaining currency very fast in India and outside India, which is the OTT ecosystem? Tarun, why don't we start with you?
So thank you, Nava, for a long introduction. I was almost embarrassed at the end of it. Thank you, Maciej, for joining us from Poland. It's really good to have you around, and I hope it isn't too early in the morning for you. So it's a good question, right? Where is digital advertising going? What is going to happen to independent publishers? What's going to happen to the big, large networks of Facebook and Google? For anybody to say that Facebook and Google are going to go away would be kind of very foolish, right? Will they reduce their influence on digital advertising? Maybe. Will other publishers come in and come in with scale? I think definitely yes. And why is that? I think for many years, the capability of segmented and targeted advertising the capability of doing good big data, having great ad servers, digital ad servers, being able to do a great consumer profiling 360 through a good CDP, lied or was only a domain of the big tech, right? Which was Google and Facebook and a little bit of Amazon when they started their advertising program about a couple of years ago. But I think the democratization of technology and the democratization of platforms and their ability to attract users and users at scale is allowing for this paradigm to change, for this picture to shift. Platforms like ours and even others like Hotstar or many others are now over, closing to 100 million or over 100 million users, with some significant amount of video consumption around some very quality content with a high amount of loyalty. And I think the picture started to change about 2 to 3 years ago when most broadcasters in India and across the world realized that they couldn't let the OTT game be secondary and be played by either syndicating content to platforms like Netflix or Amazon, or putting their content on a revenue share on platforms like YouTube. But they had to control their own digital destinies. They started building their own platforms, but once they built their platforms and they started to see some very scaled up consumption, they realized that they hadn't invested enough behind analytics and ad tech. And I think the last 12 and the next 12 to 18 months will see some significant investments and building up of independent networks on the back of partners like ClearCode and others in actually getting what they deserve and owning the end-to-end ad tech pipeline for themselves.
Right. Maciej, you work very deeply in this entire audience measurement, or rather audience journey measurement, and the MarTech space. What is your sense globally? Also, a lot of media, traditional legacy media companies are investing a lot in the OTT space. Disney just pulled out all their content from Netflix and has launched their own platform. What's your sense of what the future looks like?
Sure. I mean, I think I totally agree with what Tarun said. I want to add one point before I answer this question, is that the very big advantage of OTT is creating these brand experiences. Like, there is no ad block, banner blindness, and ways that will be distracted from seeing the brand message. So this is a big advantage. Where I see disadvantage and why there is so much investment into the space is that the advertising on web or in mobile apps has been with us for decades now, and maybe for mobile apps not decades, but for web definitely decades. And the technology is very advanced today. There is a lot of attribution platforms, segmentation, and so on. We'll come to that probably why some of these platforms will no longer work with the demise of cookies, but they are very advanced compared to what's in OTT. And there is a big investment into creating these ecosystems where there is end-to-end ad buying, data, analytics, attribution for the OTT channel, because basically we are building in a matter of the last few years everything that has been created on the web for over a decade. So I see there is a big need because there is a big opportunity and great inventory, great experience. But we need to catch up with the technology, and some of the players like ZEE5 is already doing or in the process of doing that. But there's a lot of legacy players, even in the US, that are years behind. And they are starting to build this technology for the OTT.
So, good you brought up this point about third-party cookies, extinction of the third-party cookies. So, what happens? How do you see the future of audience buying and advertising on digital changing, and how does the OTT system gain out of that? Give us some granularity. What do you think will happen, say, in the next 12 months? How does the balance of power kind of shift.
Mm-hmm. So,
Especially also given the fact that privacy laws are becoming very strict.
Yeah, that's one point. So I think there are two things that influence that. One is the regulatory space, and not only what happened in Europe with GDPR, but also what's happening in Brazil, what's happening in India, in other countries where the privacy laws get stricter. And there is a limitation in what we can do in context of sharing the data between vendors. That's why I see that there will be a big reliance on first-party data. And some of the big publishers on web, like even New York Times, announced that they will no longer do the third-party audience selling or buy or inventory selling. It will be all based on the first-party data. And the OTT has a big advantage as by design, we know everything, like the users are identified. They log in with their username or their telecom into the OTT platform. So they are identified. It's not like with web where we can lose the cookie when the user blocks it or changes the browser. So I think this is by design a huge advantage of OTT, that we are dealing with primarily identified audiences. And that's what all other channels are going, shifting to, primarily on web where the cookies are used and they will no longer be relevant. What I see also is that there is more interest in the first party data technology. So CDPs in particular, building the customer data platforms to aggregate data across different sources that these organizations have. And I think, again, OTT has a big advantage that they can do great partnerships with various players, whether there are telecoms or whether there are other internet providers, or there are other partners that have data, and having identified audience helps you to match this data with the partner and enrich your audience data. And that is a matter of selling the ad inventory at a high premium price versus selling it unidentified users at a low price.
Right. So let me stay on this point about data and hop across to Tarun. Tarun, these are interrelated things. If you look at the large publishers, non-OTT publishers, the Googles and the Facebook books of the world, they inherently require registration, and hence their ability to mine that data, because they know who exactly is using a Gmail and who's using the Facebook account. They managed to build huge programmatic plays on top of this layer of data that they are primarily collecting directly from the users. OTT players, on the other hand, have a mixed bag. So in cases where you have subscriber data, obviously people are paying and they are kind of holding accounts. But there's a large number of users who are consuming OTT content without really registering and giving you access to that kind of data. So how do you think OTT players over the next 12 months can overcome this primary data deficit that currently they have? Because that also kind of means more earnings. The more the advertiser can map the data, the primary data, the more his confidence in investing in the platform goes up.
So you're right, Naval. I think OTT made a mistake when they launched, that they allowed a lot more guest users onto their platform without registering, directly with the OTT platform. So I'll tell you 2 or 3 things that OTT platforms did or shouldn't have done. One, we all allowed guest users to keep consuming video because we thought it was early stage without having compulsory or mandatory registration. 2, while doing the mandatory registration, we didn't take enough fields like age and gender and so on and so forth. Third, we allowed a lot more social logins on our platform, which didn't give us enough data pipeline from the social platforms like Google and Facebook. And all of this is something that we corrected over a period of time. I think you live to learn and learn to live. So to help you understand, a platform like ours now, if you watch over 5 videos without being registered, you have to go back and register. So it's mandatory registration at one level. At the second level, even if you were to come in and register through social, which is because of convenience we still allow, which is Facebook and Google, You have to enrich your profile in terms of age and gender. And it's even more important for us because increasingly government laws and regulation around content and around age and guardrails around that make it very important for us to get that data, both date of birth as well as gender for us. Uh, then lastly, I think we've also all built a network of relationships on data partnerships to be able to enrich this first party data with other partners who have similar logins. And we work with other loyalty programs, we other work with other telcos who are able to actually bring alive our data management platforms. And much like uh, Maciej was saying, we now have a fairly big investment in building a consumer data platform, where not only our first party data and registered verified users flow in, but a lot more data partners who flow in their data basis are their understanding and their consumption of the same users. And we've been able to multiply that those attributes and that profile in a fairly rich manner. And that investment continues to grow and grow.
So, Maciej, as you know, India is a unique country. To convert users into subscribers is far more tougher as compared to some other parts of the world. And hence, as Tarun said, a lot of the OTT usage started as a sampling service to lure users in and keep the barrier of entry as low as possible, not even ask them for basic details. So what do you think, like Tarun was explaining, what do you think are the ways that, now that there is a substantial chunk of user base and advertisers are looking at the platforms very seriously to invest in, what are the ways in which we can sort of short circuit the process and jump over, because you can't have now suddenly millions of people registering and sharing their data overnight.
So I think like what Tarun mentioned about gated content and forcing the users after they experience the service to sign in is the way that like it's a global trend, even for non-OTT content. That's basically, how you gain the identified users. The moment you have identified users, you can do much more in context of the data. And what's most important, you can collect bits of data over time and you don't lose it. In the cookie world, like the moment that the browser clears the cookies, you are losing all the history. And here, like the moment, we don't have to collect all the data at once. We can do it very slowly. We can also build it based on the content consumption over time, how it changes. We can do a lot of analytics based on that will help us later to classify the users into audiences that will be very valuable for the advertisers.
Sorry, Naval, can I come in? And I think the big advantage that OTT players bring into the country is that advertisers are used to buying on some of their key marquee shows on broadcast, right? But advertisers didn't know what the psychographics and what the other attributes of these users were. The same users, and a fair amount of them migrate from watching on TV to watching on OTT. You now know them, one, at an n equal to 1 level.
That's right.
And two, you now know them far more than what you knew before, which you knew them through a panel and you knew them through a panel into age and gender and so on and so forth. But as more data flows in and as you grow to know them more and more, your ability to get those many signals into the same set of users that you were doing through broadcast now on OTT is far richer. A platform like ours, which is becoming 360 degree in terms of being a super app, we now have hypershots coming, and hypershots becomes almost quasi-social, right? Where you have far more many signals because there's user-generated content and people like and share and display affinity to a certain kind of users or certain kind of story or certain kind of even products. And all of those signals keep enriching your first party data, which is all verified through a single identifier.
So tell me, that's very interesting, the hyperlocals point. Tell me something. Why don't you tell us a little more bit about it? Especially, how do you plan to dovetail user-generated content into the existing content on the platform? How will it work, the synchronization?
So it doesn't really synchronize in that sense. It's a separate section within the app. So it's much like a super app where you have different different areas. But what we thought was really that for several years, the influencer game built this social platforms, right? And who were these influencers? These influencers were all these TV stars who are really on our shows for so many years, right? So all the 40 channels of the Z network and all the characters and actors within that actually build the entire influencer list in the country. A part of it, not all of it. And then there is Bollywood, and there is sports, and there are newscasters. And we thought that we had access to so many of these. Their fans wanted to connect with them directly, and the fans anyway came to consume their characters on our platform on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And we could extend that experience of fandom onto a Hypershots platform. Also, all our reality shows allowed regular users to become superstars or at least celebrities of their own. And this Hypershots platform will also funnel that talent into our various reality shows and so on and so forth. So really there were three vectors that we were working on. One was fandom, one was fun, and we thought that there's a lot out there that you can play with music, play with dialogues and all that. And the last was factual, and we think that there is a lot of DIY content in short form that is waiting to be done. And all of it had a great overlap with our existing audiences. And we thought that, while audiences in India find it difficult to have too many apps on their phone, largely because of low memory, low real estate on the phones, one super app could do it all for them.
Fantastic. Let me just pick up an audience question now. There's somebody who wants to know, would OTT overtake television or cinema in the next 5 years?
I think that question has been answered in many research reports, but I'm not going to. But I'm not going to put my job up.
To a company which is primarily a television company, which has been so far a television company, and it is an anonymous attendee. Let me also tell you, I can't see the name on the screen. It says anonymous attendee.
Why don't you tell us what is Pitch Madison report saying?
Well, I mean, my sense is that in India, like it's happened with mobile telephony, it's happened so many times in media, things move on parallel tracks. So it's not like one thing takes over the other. OTT will grow at its own pace. Television penetration is still growing. A lot of companies have been very fast to pronounce the death of print, but look at regional print, it continues to grow at a healthy rate year after year. So I think a lot of learnings that we have from Western markets might not be exactly replicable in India. At least for the next 5 years, television will continue to grow. Obviously, the pace of growth will be different because OTT's base is low. I was reading another report which said over the next 5 years, OTT ecosystem is expected to grow 24% compound annual rate of growth, which is significant given the fact that the advertising market in the last 4 or 5 years has grown at what? A CAGR of 11-12%, give or take. So OTT will grow at 2x. And obviously, one of the components that will fuel the growth is also subscription monies, which for television has also started coming in, if you see in the last 5-6 years, which was a very small pie, before digitization in television started. So the simple answer is, I don't think anybody can really predict whether it will overtake cinema or television. But one thing is for sure, OTT will become a very, very large pie of the entire digital ecosystem, which will be large enough. Maybe it will be equal to TV in 5 years. That is certainly a possibility. This year, from what I understand, digital itself would have reached 18,000 crores in India, which is from some $2.5 billion. But maybe because of COVID, the growth will be lesser. But in 5 years...
Yeah, but one of the segments that will grow even this year, they say even after all of this, possibly digital and digital video will possibly grow the fastest. Yeah.
That's right. So let me come back to you.
So you answered this much better than me.
Oh, I've learned from you, Tarun. Let me hop back across to Maciej. One of the things that we keep talking about, Maciej, is data, privacy of data. I think that's globally a massive issue. In countries like India, how the data is going to be used. I was reading today, actually, that I think it's Germany that has disallowed Facebook. A German Supreme Court has disallowed Facebook to mine user data for selling to third parties, right? And Why don't you tell us a little more? You have a better idea about what's going on there.
Sure. So, I mean, I think Facebook is a very interesting case because they collect user data about all our interactions, etc. So they have locations, almost everything that we do there. There is a lot of spending significant amount of time there. So the Supreme Court banned them from selling to third parties, but what they say, they don't sell the data because they sell advertising targeted by the data, and the data does not leave the ecosystem. So there is still, like, I think some dispute over, like, whether they are using it, like, in my opinion, they are using it for advertising, not for the purpose of, like, serving the user the content and using the service. So they are using it for advertising purposes, and the user has to agree to that. But in their opinion, they are not sending it, they are selling advertising, right, and they are not exporting the data outside of their ecosystem. Talking a bit more broadly about privacy, yes, it gets much stricter. And I think, like, this is the good thing, like the ad tech and marketing technology space just got out of control, and we, like, the whole industry earned that they are now forced to adapt, and there will be a lot of changes regarding that. But it's not that, you know, we won't be able to track the users. We have to do it with the certain either consent or certain anonymization, so that we cannot target an individual rather than audience. But it's not that it's end of the world for ad tech companies now. Like, we see, like, even Clearcode, the company I founded, sees the growth in the ad tech projects, mainly because they have to adopt, or there are new channels. There's a lot of investment into the first party space compared to the third party data that it used to be for the last decade. So yeah, I mean, not sure if you want me to elaborate on anything else in particular here.
Right. So Tarun, there's a specific question for you. This says, what kind of tools do you offer to the marketers to empower them to use your channel or your shows?
So what we're developing now, while we have 4 ad products, which is AdVault, Amplify, and we also have a big DMP called Infonomics, which we allow marketers to set up their campaigns and set up their audience segments and so on and so forth. What we now work with Clearcode is to build out an entire self-serve platform, which will allow and empower marketers to be able to do almost everything themselves. Forget setting up audiences and campaigns, but also do biddable advertising, buy biddable advertising, and to also to be able to do optimization, waterfall analytics, and basically end-to-end optimization on their campaigns. So our entire vision is that the advertiser or the advertising agency will be fully empowered in every way to be able to advertise on our platform, and it will have very low managed services or human intervention.
Right, fantastic. We don't have time left, so I'll ask one last question, which is also very relevant to the Indian market, to both of you gentlemen. Measurement in digital has been kind of a bone of contention for the last many years, unlike the legacy media, which has, you know, third-party measurement tools run by companies like Nielsen. In India, you have a BAR for TV, you have a MRUC, which does IRS, the readership studies. Digital does not have any third-party measurement tools. Do you think the time has come, Tarun, to have third-party independent measurement tools? It will allow the industry to grow at a much faster rate. So digital, having said that, digital is far more transparent in terms of data as compared to legacy media. But do you think if we have third-party measurement at this point of time, it will help us jump the growth curve even faster?
So there is, so let me correct you here, Naval. There is no single currency that measures everybody together, but there is measurement of individual platforms, which is third party.
Right.
Okay, so on our platform, we have Oracle's Moat, which measures view-through rates. So how much of the advertising did anybody see? We also have Nielsen's DAR, which gives advertisers an ability to see who saw an advertising, which is what age, what genders, and whatever filters we decide to sell and they decide to measure. So those two parameters already exist on most good quality platforms. But I think there is a need for all platforms to come together and build a single currency. And I think that even, at IMAI, I'm trying to work with almost all platforms to see if, we can come to a consensus. There is obviously work that is happening at BARC and Ecamm. There is work that is happening at Nielsen individually. So yes, there are platforms. There is Conviva, which is also trying to do something on the smart TV side collectively. So there are lots of options and opportunities that are coming together. And I can tell you with all my experience in this space, it's not more than 18 to 24 months away. We will find a solution to something like this.
Right.
And people like Maciej are doing a lot of this kind of work through Piwik. So let him tell us a little bit.
Maciej, why don't you tell us globally, how is the third-party independent data measurement being tackled? We know that Google, Facebook are not on third-party platforms.
So I mean, there are ecosystems like Google and Facebook does not let independent measurement, and there is a lot of controversy and even lawsuits because of that. What I want to point out is maybe something different. So when it comes to independent measurement on web, for example, when it comes to audiences, this space will get disrupted by the demise of cookies that we covered earlier, as well as by privacy laws, because by tracking these users, you share their information, and there needs to be some new mechanisms developed. And similarly to OTT, we have to develop some new currency and new systems, how to do it in a privacy-friendly way, and at the same time, so that we can compare apples to apples rather than have like right now, like even with some leading platforms, you have significant differences in kinds of measurement. And that has been always the case, like with every time we go into integrating, for example, real-time bidding platforms, we see these discrepancies, we get them down quite a lot, but they are always there. And that's because like different vendors have a different, let's say, currency of how certain things are being measured. So to sum up, there are still challenges ahead to make it independent of the channel, but we'll get there. I'm sure that we'll get there globally as well.
Brilliant. We are out of time. As you know, this is a larger MarTech event, and we have the next speaker already waiting. So thank you to both of you gentlemen. It's exciting, I'm sure, to be in the OTT space. It's a sunrise sector. While legacy media is looking at confronting many issues, especially during the lockdown, OTT is a sector which is likely to continue to grow at a very fast pace, but with the challenges of having technology and having more competition. One of the reports I read said India alone has 95 OTT platforms now, and growing, because every month 1 or 2 new OTT platforms are launching. So with that, thank you to both of you for spending your valuable time. And we'll try and take some of the conversation offline. Thank you, Tarun. Thank you, Maciej. Rohel, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.